Welcome to the Network Engineering Video Blog. I'm your host, Michael Crane. Today we're going to look at the initial configuration and setting up the remote access for the Cisco router. And I say router generically because the way we're going to look at it can be really applied to almost any Cisco router, whether it's an older one or a newer one. The config steps are going to be basically the same. Maybe some of the commands might change a little bit from what we do for the 3845, but the general setup is going to be similar. So it's going to be fairly generic. I'm going to try to keep this video somewhat short so it can be used as a reference whenever you set up a new router. So I've got the equipment in the equipment rack, and yeah, I know this is not the proper way to rack equipment. It's basically the Ethernet switch is sitting on top of the router, and I have some non-stick padding underneath them to keep them from sliding around. And but I set it up like this mainly for the video. It's, this thing is flipped around backwards, from the direction the router is facing, but all the important stuff is facing towards us, so we can talk about it. So on the router, we've got the router and our Ethernet switch network module, and then we also have the basic 2 gig E ports, the SFP, and the console port, which is what we're going to use to configure this. And if you can't get close to it, there's a couple alternatives. One is to, just set the router on your desk and configure the initial setup while it's on your desk, and then stick it in the rack, which is done quite often. Another thing is if you've got a PC that's close to it, like right here, I've got this PC that I use to control the 3D printer, and you can just come off of this into this console port with a serial connection, and then do a remote desktop or a VNC into this PC and use it as like a terminal server. Or then there's the third option, is just putting in a real terminal server. But today, since I have a console cable long enough to stretch to my desktop over here on the workbench, I'm just going to use just a straight console connection into my laptop. But I just wanted to point that out for some alternatives. If you, this is going to be, and I'll show you this on the drawing here in a minute. But we've got our one Ethernet switch here, but we also have an Ethernet switch in here. And on the drawing, I was looking at it, and I think we're going to call this one the Ethernet switch 1, even though it's still embedded inside the router. And we'll look at that here in a minute. And then this is going to be Ethernet switch 2, which we'll look at in another video. So really you don't need an uplink from this to the router because it's already embedded. But we will need an uplink later from here, and that, like I said, that'll be another video. So right now we're just concerned with getting remote access to this, and I think what I'm going to do, so we don't have to mess around with this card today, is I'm going to use one of these gigabit Ethernet ports and plug it into my local network here, and just assign it a static IP address in my local network. And that way I don't have to keep the cable ran across the floor and everything. I can just SSH right into this port and do all the configuration and change all the config in this network module without affecting my remote access. Yeah, let's get started on this.
Okay, so we're going to be using PuTTY again to access the console port on the 3845. And I have showed this in other videos, so I'm just going to load this configuration up. It's on COM3. Okay, so we're going to open this up, and now I'm going to turn the router on. Okay, our router is booted up, and we're in enable mode. I'm going to do a show flash. It's a show flash, and And I saved this config off the other day when we recovered the password. I'm just gonna save that off to a USB drive real quick, and these other tar files in here are for this, and this file up here are for the security device manager, and we're not going to be using that, but I'm going to go ahead and leave them on there. We don't really need the room at this point since it looks like our load fits in here pretty good, and we still have some space available. And I don't know, we might do a video on that, on setting it up. Cisco actually recommends using the security device manager to do the initial installation or initial config, but I have never used it, so we're not going to use it. And I might do some reading on it and see if it's worthwhile. It might have some interesting configs in there that may be easier to set up with that, like maybe VPNs or something like that. But for today, we're not going to worry about that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug the USB in, and this USB is just formatted with a FAT32, and it is small. It's like 2 gigabytes, and these older routers using USB 1.1, you don't want to get some crazy big USB and plug in there because it probably won't read it. Okay, I can go plug it in. Excellent. So, as you can see in the console message here, we have it has detected USB flash 0. So now we can look at the files in here just with a show USB flash 0 : So here we go. I'm just gonna copy it over real quick. I might have to change the name of it since there's so much stuff on this flash drive. So let me do a show flash again. And so we want to copy this old config. First you have to tell where it's a flash, and then old config. And we're going to copy that to USB flash 0, and we're going to call it Cisco eBay 3845 config. Okay. Yep. All right, it's done. And I guess I should probably copy this load off too, just for safekeepings. Just in case it gets corrupted, we can always put it back. So I'm going to do a copy flash this file name to USB flash 0. And I'm not going to put a file name this time. It should, yeah, see, it should automatically just pick up what the file name is copying. And this will probably take a minute since it's USB 1.1. It's fairly slow. And the compact flash is also pretty slow. Okay, so it's all done. We've backed up our old config, and we've backed up our software load. And the rest of this stuff, we don't really care about too much. It'll be fine, I'm sure. Okay, if you remember our network layout drawing that we did a while back when we were looking at IP addresses, this is the document we came up with of how we're going to lay out our network. So we're going to go back to this, and now that we've got the hardware in place, we need to start coming up with some names. So one of the first things we need to do is identify or create a host name and username, password, and enable password. If you remember at the beginning of the video, I said this eSwitch 1 is actually embedded into this router right here. So, and the router's IP address is .1, so I'm going to kind of move these guys off to the side. And I'm going to take this guy out here, maybe. And I'm just going to kind of move him right up here, so it's attached. And this guy right here is going to be, he's not going to be .1, he is going to be .1. And I know this looks a little confusing, and maybe it is. It might be better to leave it separated. But yeah, for now we'll just do this. If it looks like it's going to be too confusing, then we will change it back. So our gateway router, which has the embedded eSwitch, which we called eSwitch 1, and then the switch sitting on top of it is going to be our eSwitch 2. So another thing we're going to need, which isn't on this drawing, is we need a temporary IP address for SSH, so we don't have to keep using the console port and having a cable drug all over the place. It just makes it a lot easier, plus it's a lot faster. So I'm going to just copy one of these laptops, because I'm going to be using a laptop. I'm going to paste it up here, and I'm just going to call it temp access. Okay, and we're going to just plug him directly into, he's just going to be plugged directly into gig E00, and his IP address is going to be 192.168.1.75. I don't think I have one. I'll have to double check that, but what I'm doing basically is I'm just giving it a static IP address in the lab network here at the Network Engineering video blog. It's plugged into the local LAN here, then I can access it from anywhere. So that makes it convenient to set up as well. Okay, so another thing we're going to do as well is I'm going to give this guy a name. We're just going to call him, let's call him the Dallas Gateway. Okay, so he's going to be Dallas Gateway, and we'll give him a number 1. We could call him the Dallas router, but he's really going to be our gateway. And the DHCP DNS is still going to be applicable, and this Ethernet switch, which is embedded, we don't really need to give him a host name, so we're just going to leave him eSwitch 1. And we'll name this Ethernet switch later when we go to set him up in another video. So I think that's about it for planning this out. He's got an IP address. We've got some temporary access to make it easier to set him up. And you could probably leave this here forever. There's a lot of people that have private IP addresses specifically on a private network inside a company that has limited access to other people. The people who are managing it can access it. They can make changes to all the configs in here without having to worry about losing access, because this .1 right here, if it's associated with this Ethernet switch interface, which it probably will be eventually, and you start making changes to this, then you could lose your network connectivity, and then you're going to be back out in the lab trying to gain console port access. So we don't want to do that. So this makes it pretty handy. Okay, so now that the router is rebooted, we want to erase the startup config and go into the initial configuration mode. So we're already in the enable mode, so we're going to just type in erase startup config. Okay, and it says erase NVRAM will move all the configuration files. Continue, confirm. Okay, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, and okay, so it's erased the NVRAM. So I mean the startup config. So now when we reboot the router or reload it, it's going to go into initial configuration mode. So I'm just going to type in reload. So system configuration has been modified. Save. No. Confirm. And I'm just hitting enter where it says confirm. Okay, so the router is booted up and it's asking us if we want to go in initial configuration. And I'm going to type in yes. And let's see here. At any point you may enter a question mark for help. Okay, use Control C to abort. Okay, default settings are in brackets. It says basic management setup configures only enough connectivity for management of the system. Extended setup will ask you to configure each interface on the system. Okay, so we want to go into basic management setup. Yes. The host name. So if you remember from our document, we're going to call this the Dallas Gateway 1. Okay, the enable secret password. Use protect access to prove this password after it becomes encrypted. And just for today, all the passwords I'm going to make are going to be Cisco. And it's going to complain about that. And later we'll change them to something else. But while we're setting it up, I don't want to type in a bunch of complicated passwords. And later we'll come back and change that. So it's going to be Cisco. And now it's asking me for the enable password, which this isn't going to be encrypted, and it's going to complain severely when I make it the same password. See, it says, please choose password that is different from the enabled secret. And it's because we're basically letting the cat out of the bag with an unencrypted password that's the same as the encrypted one. But I'm going to force the issue and just type it back in again. And now it's asking for the virtual terminal password, which is for the SSH access and telnet access. And we're just going to call it Cisco. And configure SNMP management. No, we don't want to do that right now. We can do that later. So it brought up all the interfaces, or it's listing them anyway. And it says enter the interface name used to connect to the management network. Okay, and the management network is that temporary. That's what it says. Temp access. I should have called it management access. A lot of companies, like I said, they'll have a whole management network, and this would be the password. I mean the IP address for that. So and we know it's going to be gig E00. So and that's this guy right here. So we're just going to copy him and paste him in and configure IP on this interface. Yes. So I'm going to hit enter. IP address is 192.168.1.75. Now subnet mask. Yes, it's in a class C. So just hit enter, and it brings everything up. So so now it's giving us three choices. We can go to the iOS command prompt without saving this config, return back to the setup without saving this config, or basically start over again and save this configuration, NVRAM, and exit, which is the default. We're just going to hit enter. And it's still complaining about the enable password and the secret password. And we'll change it later. You just have to remember to do that. If you want to get back into this very simple script, you just type in setup at the enable prompt. So if you go into enable and Cisco, and then just type in setup. Oops, of course you got to type it in the correct way. And later I'll show you how to turn this off, because this is annoying as all get out. But back to what I was saying, if you want to run that script again, you just type in setup, and then it goes back in an initial configuration mode. But we're just going to say no. So yeah, let's take a quick look at what it added. Show config. And you can see we got our host name in here, our secret, our enable password. And what's interesting is you'll notice is nothing is enabled. So no IP routing means this thing won't even route. They've turned off the routing engine and the Cisco Express forwarding. And here's our gig gigabit, our management interface basically, and it looks like it's all set up and enabled. The other one, as you can tell, is shut down, and then all the other interfaces on that network module, the fast Ethernet interfaces, are also shut down. So here's our line VTY it asked for the password, but this isn't set up for SSH yet, and we'll have to do that here in a second. One of the things that we don't want is we want our we need to change our exec timeout so it doesn't time us out. Okay, so when I start making changes to a config, one of the things I like to do is pull up Notepad, just so I can copy the current config off and look at it while I'm typing in commands. So I'm going to pull up Notepad real quick, and I'm going to put him over here. And right now I'm just going to copy everything out of here. Copy all the clipboard, edit, paste. Okay. And yeah, so it's got everything in here. Let's see, delete some of this other junk out. Okay. So let's turn off this this timeout on the console here and on the VTYs, because right now when we're trying to get everything set up, I don't want to have to keep logging into it, and later we can go back and change it. So the command to do that is config t. We're going to type in line console or con 0, and the command is exec timeout. And now it's asking for timeout in minutes and seconds. And we're going to put 0 minutes, and a question mark again, and 0 seconds. And that tells it that basically we never want it to time out. So we're going to exit out of that. The next one we're going to do is the VTY 0 and 4. So let me just copy this over and just execute that exact same command. Alright, hit Control C and then alright, and it's building the config. We can verify it with a show config. Hold on, I'm going to clear out the buffer here. So show config. Alright. So now neither one of these will time out, and this can actually be kind of a problem if you have people that will SSH into something and never get out of it. But you know, because if they tie up all the VTYs, then you won't be able to get into it until you find out who is logged into it and kick them out, or have to go into the console and kick them out. But yeah, for right now, while we're setting it up initially, I'm just going to leave it like this, and we can change that later. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is create a local user account with privilege level 15, and because that'll allow us to get into enable mode, and also a password for them. And there's a couple ways of doing this. You can use the AAA, which is the Advanced Authentication and something else service, and we might set that up later. But right now, we're just going to set up a local one. So we're going to do a config t. We're going to say username is going to be Cisco. Privilege level is going to be 15. And the password, and you can, if you hit password, any of these commands, so if you're not sure what privilege level, you can hit a question mark 0 through 15. So we want 15, which is the highest. And then if you don't know the next command, just hit question mark, and it gives you a list of options. You can say password, and now we're going to say, okay, do we want it encrypted or unencrypted or hidden? We're just going to say 0 because we're not sure we're going to keep this. And now we're just going to type in the password, which is Cisco, and that's it. I do a Control C and then a write, and that now we should have a local user configured in there, and we can verify that with a show config. And the reason why I do a show config and not a show run is to make sure that I have actually written that file. I'm not. If you don't write the file and the router reboots, you will lose anything you configured. So we've got the config there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Okay. And we're gonna now we want to set up SSH access. So we're gonna do that on line VTY04. So we're gonna do another config T and a line VTY04. Okay. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna say the privilege level is 15 on these, which basically just allows you to access enable mode from those VTYs. Okay, and we want to use a local login, so we're going to say login local. Okay, and now we're going to tell it what kind of transport we're going to use. Is it going to be Telnet or SSH? So we're going to say transport. And you can see, it's input. Okay. And here's all the different inputs it can be, but no one uses Telnet anymore. But we're going to use SSH. All right. So we Control C and do a write. Do a show config. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I plugged in an Ethernet cable into the 3845 management port or the temporary port on our drawing right here. So I plugged it in and I verified that IP that .75 isn't being used. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a command window from my laptop here and see if we can ping it. So I'm going to ping 192.168.1.75. And nope, it doesn't. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it was able to ARP that interface and ping it. So let's see if we can SSH into it now. So I'm going to do a new session here in PuTTY, and I'm just going to copy this session here. I've got some other settings in there but it's SSH, and we're going to change this to 75. Oops, to 75. And then we're going to call it Cisco 3845 management. And save that. And let's open it up. And what happened? It didn't. You can't see it off screen, but I'll restart it and you'll see what happens. Yeah, so it was refused, and I kind of knew this was going to fail, but I thought we'd try it anyway. And the reason why it's failing is for one thing, I don't know what version of SSH we're using right here, and so we need to make sure we're using version 2. Another thing we're going to need, which we didn't do, and I knew this was going to come back to haunt us, is we need to generate a key for SSH, and we're going to do that right now. Okay, so to generate a new key, or more properly called the RSA key, we're going to need to do a couple things. The first thing we're going to need to do is we need to give it a domain name. So we're going to do a config T, and then we're going to say IP domain name. And you can pretty much name this whatever, but I'm just going to call it the network engineering vblog.com. Okay, and that we can change that later. It's going to use this to generate the key. That domain name is going to use to generate the key, and we can always regenerate it or not. It's not that big of a deal. And it's also going to use the host name. So this it's going to also use this host name right here with the with this domain name to generate the key. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to generate the key. So we're going to do a crypto key generate RSA. Okay. And it's asking for how many bytes, and we're just going to use a default of 512 for right now. And all right. Oh, well, see, there you go. So we generated 512, and it automatically told us that an RSA key size needs to be at least 768 bits for SSH version 2. So, and then it only enabled SSH version 1. So let's generate another RSA key. So we're going to say, I'm just going to hit the up arrow. All right. And it says you already have an RSA key defined. Do you want to replace it? Yes. And we're going to make it this time 1024 bits. Okay. All right. So so they have enabled SSH version 1.99, and I guess that's pretty doggone close to version 2. So I'm going to go ahead and write this. Oops. Control C and then write. All right. And now let's see if we can get our PuTTY session to work. Our SSH session to work. So we're gonna so it's SSH 75, and it pulled this up. So this is good. This means that the new RSA2 key fingerprint is, and here's the key that we just generated, and it's asking if we want to accept it. We're going to say yes, and here we go. So that profile I copied automatically pops in the username Cisco, and so now I just have to type in the password Cisco, and we're in. And you notice that we didn't have to type enable, and that's because we set the where is it? Show config. That's because we set the privilege level to 15 right here. If we would have set it to 0, then we would have had to do the enable command. And we can test that later, or you can test that if you want. Just mess around with it. Okay, so we're going to do a couple more house cleaning items, and I will. Then I think we will be done with what we wanted to accomplish today. So the first thing I do is I'm going to do a show config, and I'm going to copy it to my notepad over here. Okay, and I'm just going to start from the top and see what we got going on. Okay, so we got the host name, good. Okay, we could do syslog. We'll do that another day. Okay, so we want to use IP routing. It is a router, so we're going to do a config T, and we're going to just say IP routing. That basically just turns on IP routing. Okay, and we're also going to, I always use Cisco Express Forwarding. I don't know why they defaulted off, maybe because the IP routing is defaulted off. So we're going to do a config T, and we're just going to say IPCEF. And these commands that I'm doing are pretty global. They're global to the whole router. So, okay. So, okay, here's our domain name we stuck in there. And here's our local username and password. And our management interface. And you can give this a description. So let's give it a quick description so we don't forget what it is. So we'll do a config T. And we're going to say, here's another nice thing about doing this. You can just copy and paste this into here, and we're going to say description. We're going to say management interface. Or we'll say management network. Okay. Let's see, what else we got in here? Okay, here's all our Ethernet interfaces on our network module. I believe it defaults to VLAN 0, but let's see, we're not using HTTP. We set our timeouts. It looks like we're all good to go. So I could probably even remove this off of here. It's looking at the local login, but that's okay. And we're only using, our only input is SSH, so it's not going to accept anything but SSH. So excellent. Okay, so we're about done with the initial configuration. There's one last step that I always do as a matter of course, and that is I pull out my handy dandy labeler and I label the router or the switches or any equipment. That tells me that it's got a host name and IP address, so the initial configuration is at least done. So the next step will be adding features. So that's about it. If you like this video or have any questions or comments, please leave me a question or comment, and if you like it, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.